You know what's wild? How a misdirected message can demolish 17 years of your existence quicker than any heated confrontation ever managed to. 1 second you're chatting about mundane things like grocery lists or weekend plans. The next you're staring at a sultry text clearly intended for someone else's screen. It's like watching a controlled demolition of everything you thought was solid and real in your life. Let me introduce myself properly. I'm Liam, 44 years old, and my now ex-wife Alice is 42. We were married for a solid decade, though our history stretches back nearly 17 years in total. We spent roughly 5 years dating before making things official with a wedding ceremony. Our wedding anniversary actually fell exactly 5 years after our first official date as a couple. I remember that detail because I'd always been sentimental about keeping track of these milestones. I thought they mattered. I thought we were building something that would last forever. When I think back to those beginning chapters, those early days of our relationship, there's this nostalgic warmth that washes over me like a comfortable blanket on a cold night. The connection we shared felt genuinely unbreakable. The chemistry between us was electric, and I believed with every fiber of my being that we were soulmates. I've accumulated countless cherished moments with her over the years. Vacations to the coast, quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers, late-night conversations about our dreams and fears. Unfortunately, there's little reason to cling to those memories anymore since I discovered her infidelity, and honestly, nothing has ever devastated me quite like this revelation. Part of me genuinely wishes I could have lived out my remaining years blissfully unaware of her betrayal. I recognize that sounds weak, maybe even pathetic to some of you reading this, but the sensation of watching everything you've carefully constructed over nearly 2 decades come crashing down is genuinely unbearable. It's like spending years building an intricate house of cards only to have someone deliberately blow on it. I didn't just build a life for myself, I built one specifically to share with her, and now I'm witnessing its inevitable collapse in real time. Here's the thing that makes this even harder. I have zero desire to start fresh with another woman because no one else is Alice. Yes, she wounded me deeply. Yes, logic dictates I shouldn't still harbor feelings for her, but emotions don't follow logic or reason. Love operates in mysterious, often cruel ways that make absolutely no sense when you try to rationalize them. I'm sure some of you will judge me harshly for this admission, and that's fine. I'm judging myself pretty harshly too. But unless you've walked this exact path, unless you've felt the ground disappear beneath your feet while your heart still stubbornly clings to someone who destroyed you, you simply can't comprehend the weight of it. It feels absolutely devastating, like drowning while everyone around you breathes normally. Alice and her longtime friend launched a home staging and design company together about 8 years ago, roughly 2 years into our marriage. During our marriage, I watched it transform from 2 ambitious women cold-calling potential clients and literally knocking on doors in residential neighborhoods to a thriving enterprise with steady business flowing in naturally. They went from struggling to pay rent on a tiny office space to having a beautiful showroom downtown. I've always taken genuine pride in their accomplishments and supported them however I could, whether that meant helping them move furniture, offering business advice based on my corporate experience, or simply being a sounding board when they faced difficult decisions. They worked with all sorts of clients over the years, from young couples furnishing their first apartments to wealthy executives who wanted their vacation homes professionally decorated. But one particular guy caught my attention when Alice first mentioned him, a man named Ricardo. Initially, she only brought him up because he represented a significant contract, a really big fish for their relatively small operation, but eventually he became a regular customer with deep pockets. He originally hailed from Spain, somewhere near Barcelona I think, though his wealth afforded him multiple properties and business ventures in our area, which meant frequent flights here requiring interior design services. I was genuinely pleased they'd secured such a loyal, high-value client. This was exactly the kind of break they needed to take the business to the next level. My opinion of Ricardo shifted dramatically when Alice confided that he'd been making obvious advances toward her during their professional meetings. Apparently, he only behaved this way with Alice, not with her business partner Natalie. Despite Alice making her married status crystal clear, she wore her wedding ring to every meeting, mentioned me in conversations. He persisted with the flirtation. When I expressed concern and insisted boundaries needed establishing, especially for continued professional relations, she assured me she'd have a frank discussion with him. She promised me she'd shut it down completely and professionally. After that supposed conversation, she reported that Ricardo had agreed to back off completely and respect her marriage. I checked in about him occasionally afterward, asking how the projects were going, and she consistently claimed he'd returned to appropriate professional behavior. She'd say things like, "Oh, Ricardo's being totally normal now," or "the situation's completely fine." At least, that's the story I received at the time. Given what I know now, given how the whole ugly truth eventually came to light, I suspect I was being deceived from that very first conversation. The lies probably started the moment his name first came up. I was at work during my afternoon break when a notification appeared on my screen, a message from Alice containing an image thumbnail and text reading, "And you'll do that thing you did before. Strawberries and champagne this time." The message had this playful, intimate tone that was unmistakable. My stomach immediately dropped even before my conscious mind fully processed what I was reading. Our previous conversation had been completely mundane, something about scheduling a dentist appointment for her because she'd been having some tooth sensitivity. There was absolutely nothing remotely romantic or suggestive in our recent message history. Naturally, I was confused at first. I opened the message within maybe 3 seconds of receiving the notification, my thumb moving almost automatically, but it had already vanished from the conversation thread. My initial reaction wasn't to immediately question her or panic. First, I needed to confirm I'd read it correctly, that my eyes hadn't somehow played tricks on me. Fortunately, my Android phone allows checking notification history, which confirmed the exact wording I'd seen. I must have read it 5 or 6 times in the notification log, my heart pounding harder each time. Honestly, I was completely baffled at first. We'd literally been discussing dental appointments moments before this message appeared. My first thought was that the message hadn't been intended for me, particularly since she'd deleted it so quickly. Within those 3 seconds it took me to open the thread. Had she not deleted it, I might have accepted whatever explanation she offered. Maybe I would have convinced myself it was some kind of inside joke with a girlfriend. But that deletion told me everything. She called me almost immediately after sending it, maybe 30 seconds later. I let it ring several times before answering, trying to compose myself and decide how to play this. She sounded breathless, and when I asked why, she claimed she'd been hauling boxes around the office with Natalie. I played along, keeping my voice neutral. Throughout the entire conversation, she engaged in meaningless small talk that seemed to lack any real purpose. It was the kind of conversation you have when you're actually trying to accomplish something else entirely. She asked how my day was going twice during that single call, which she never does. I maintained a casual demeanor because I realized she was testing whether I'd seen the deleted message. She was fishing for information, trying to gauge my reaction. Based on my performance, based on my deliberately calm responses, I'm fairly certain she concluded I hadn't noticed anything. I could practically sense her relief when she felt satisfied I was clueless. Shortly after that, once she'd apparently convinced herself she was in the clear, she ended the call with some excuse about needing to get back to work. Minutes later, I texted asking what she'd deleted, trying to sound curious rather than suspicious. She fabricated a story claiming it was meant for her business partner Natalie, and sent to me accidentally. She asked, "You didn't see it before I deleted it, right?" I figured you might have. Even in text, I could sense her anxiety. I lied and said I hadn't seen anything, because I knew that would put her at ease and give me time to investigate properly. I had no concrete proof yet, but I had enough to feel completely sick to my stomach. I couldn't concentrate on work afterward, because it genuinely felt like a fundamental piece of my life was disintegrating right there in my office cubicle. My mind went to the worst possible places, imagining scenarios I'd never even considered before. There wasn't going to be any innocent explanation. If there had been, she would have been upfront from the beginning instead of acting so evasive and then calling me immediately to gauge my reaction. When I arrived home that evening, trying to act completely normal, I noticed how carefully she was watching me. She was clearly trying to read my mood and detect any changes in my behavior. Every time I walked into a room, her eyes would follow me. When I'd catch her looking, she'd quickly glance away. I know she was internally panicking over her mistake, replaying that text message in her mind over and over, wondering if I'd seen it. I felt deeply upset, but I deliberately showed only mild irritation about some fictional work problem. When she asked what was bothering me with this concerned expression on her face, I blamed it on a minor work situation that wasn't important, some nonsense about a meeting that ran long. She seemed to accept this explanation, though I could tell she was still watching me carefully. Later that night, when I finally got an opportunity to check her phone, and I had to be extremely cautious, waiting until she was in the shower, I went straight to her messages with Ricardo. The entire conversation history had been wiped clean. Completely empty. I knew with absolute certainty that she communicated with Ricardo through messaging apps because she'd shown me some of their professional conversations months ago about tile selections and furniture arrangements. So finding absolutely nothing there, not a single message, confirmed my worst suspicions. Obviously, the moment she suspected I might have seen that text, she'd scrubbed all evidence systematically. What she hadn't deleted, what she'd apparently forgotten about in her panic, were her messages with her business partner, Natalie. That evening, Alice had messaged Natalie describing how I seemed only slightly annoyed, nothing major, probably just work stress. Natalie's response didn't seem comfortable with the discussion, and she mentioned she'd warned Alice the entire situation was foolish from the start, and moving forward, she wanted no part in hearing about it. She wrote something like, "I told you this was a terrible idea, and I don't want to discuss it anymore." Throughout their exchange, they were extremely careful not to explicitly mention what they were discussing, using vague language and pronouns, but I was certain it concerned Ricardo and the affair. There really wasn't any alternative explanation that made sense. Alice seemed somewhat irritated by her friend's refusal to engage, to give her the support or validation she was apparently seeking, which angered me further because she was treating it like some college student's close call with getting caught cheating, not a married woman of 10 years risking everything we'd built together. I don't fault Natalie for not telling me directly. In her world, Alice takes priority over me. They've been best friends since college. I know she's a decent person, but expecting her to betray her best friend to inform me of Alice's affair would be unreasonable. That's asking someone to violate one of the most fundamental bonds of friendship. At minimum, I appreciated that Natalie had never encouraged the behavior and had apparently been against it from the beginning. I photographed the screen with my phone, making sure to get clear shots of the entire conversation thread, and left it at that. I didn't want to dig deeper that night, didn't want to risk getting caught snooping, but I had everything I needed as proof. While not absolutely definitive in a legal sense, it was more than sufficient for me to make a decision about our marriage and my future. I refused to continue in this situation. She doesn't love me the way I deserve if she can so easily send suggestive messages to a business client. The messages proved they'd been intimate before. That thing you did before phrase made it crystal clear. I don't know how many times it happened, whether it was twice or 20 times, but I'm certain it did happen, and I'm certain I'd been intimate with her afterward. Probably performed oral on her after she'd been with him. The thought disgusts me on such a visceral level and only reinforces my certainty that I'm done with her. I don't anticipate some elaborate confrontation plan because, honestly, I'm just exhausted and heartbroken. Her betrayal has wounded me so deeply that some days I feel like I can barely function. Yet somehow, I can't bring myself to hurt her the way she's hurt me. I can't become vindictive or cruel, even though part of me wants to. I never deserved any of this. But I'm not going to continue complaining here, so let me wrap this section up. This updates my previous post. I confronted Alice about her infidelity. It was chaotic, exactly as expected, but I'm relieved I went through with it. Every additional second I delayed felt like things were deteriorating further in my mind, like poison spreading through my thoughts. I had to act. First, I needed to secure a divorce attorney. That meant confiding in a friend about my situation, which was harder than I expected. He's a close friend, someone I've known since college, but even so, I really wanted to handle everything privately. I didn't want the attention and sympathy that comes with being at the center of something like this. I didn't want to become that guy whose wife cheated on him in our social circle. I told him that, and thankfully he kept consolation minimal and just offered practical help. He'd been through a divorce himself about 3 years ago and connected me with his attorney, a woman who'd apparently been ruthless on his behalf. I met with her, a sharp woman named Jennifer who had this no-nonsense attitude I immediately appreciated, explained everything in detail, and based on our discussion, I decided to retain her services. She's clearly competent and experienced, having handled hundreds of divorces. I made it clear I wanted paperwork prepared immediately, and she agreed to expedite things, saying she could have initial documents ready within a week. I discreetly secured a few of my possessions ahead of the divorce, some family heirlooms, some valuable collectibles I'd accumulated over the years, things that had sentimental value beyond their monetary worth. I felt if I'd done anything more extensive, it would have been too obvious, and I couldn't risk getting caught and tipping Alice off. My attorney knew about it and assisted with some of the logistics, advising me on what I could legally protect. She'd helped my friend do something similar, though more extensively in his case. However, he took considerably more time before initiating divorce proceedings, like 6 months, allowing him to be more thorough in protecting his assets. Once the papers were ready, sitting in a manila envelope in my car, I knew it was time to confront Alice face to face. Is it strange that I still felt affection for her before the confrontation? I knew once I started discussing what she'd done, anger would surface and probably consume me, but a significant part of me didn't want to initiate anything. I couldn't imagine staying with her, though. I wouldn't have lasted more than another day or two, so I simply had to proceed and finish it. I told her we needed to discuss something extremely important when she got home from work. I saw her face immediately fill with worry, her eyes widening slightly. I don't know if her thoughts jumped straight to Ricardo, but I hoped they did. I hoped she was panicking. I informed her that I'd learned something deeply disturbing about her and wanted to give her an opportunity to share her side of the story. I mentioned seeing the message she'd deleted weeks earlier, and she physically jolted in her chair like I'd slapped her. I asked who it had been intended for. She paused extensively, maybe 15 or 20 seconds of just silence. I asked again, more firmly this time, and she repeated her previous lie that it was meant for Natalie. I asked if she was having an affair with her business partner and demanded she explain why she was cheating on me with her. She rushed her words, trying to explain that wasn't the situation at all. She and Natalie had been friends forever, since freshman year of college. There were no romantic feelings between them whatsoever. The situation simply appeared worse than reality. She claimed Natalie wanted advice on seductive communication with her partner, and she'd sent that message to help demonstrate the kind of language that works. I asked why she didn't just tell her in person, since they were both at work. She claimed Natalie had been on break or something, and wasn't in the office at that exact moment. I pointed out that she'd mentioned moving boxes with someone when I'd called, presumably not alone. She started another excuse, something about the timing being off, but I interrupted and told her she could stop lying because I recognized she was struggling to keep her stories straight and consistent. I told her that her affair partner wasn't Natalie, it was a man. She remained silent when I said, "It's Ricardo, isn't it?" She went completely rigid, like she'd been electrocuted. Her face lost all color. I'll never forget how she looked in that moment when she realized what she thought was a well-kept secret was something I'd uncovered, probably with no idea how I knew or what evidence I had. She attempted to deny it, shaking her head and starting to say, "No, that's not." But I interrupted again and told her not to bother. She went quiet, and that's when I presented every piece of evidence I'd gathered: the deleted text, the conversation with Natalie, the wiped message history. I wanted it absolutely clear she wasn't going to escape this situation, unless she wanted to sell me some incredibly stupid story, like she'd been attempting. She just sat there silently, tears starting to form in her eyes. She didn't know what to say, because there genuinely wasn't anything she could say. She knew lying would be pointless at this stage. She knew offering one of those stereotypical excuses like, "it didn't mean anything," would be equally stupid and insulting. What she eventually settled on was, "I'm so sorry, Liam." She said she knew she'd ruined everything we'd built together. She knew she'd never be able to fix it, but she wanted me to understand she was sorry. She'd acted out of pure selfishness, not just for physical pleasure, but for business advantages. Apparently Ricardo was more generous with contracts when she was sleeping with him. I asked if she'd lied when she claimed Ricardo had backed off after their supposed conversation, and she admitted she had lied. She hadn't wanted me worrying about him or asking questions. He'd still been pursuing her then, and she'd had no intention of agreeing at that point, but eventually it became appealing to her for multiple reasons. She cheated the first time and felt horrible afterward, claimed she cried about it, but having done it once made subsequent times easier. The guilt diminished each time. Natalie had always opposed it, had warned her repeatedly that she was making a terrible mistake, but she hadn't listened. It had made her feel youthful and attractive in a way she hadn't felt in years. It had been thrilling, exciting, dangerous. It was never personal or directed at me. It was entirely her fault, she said. I think I just sat there briefly processing everything, trying to absorb the full scope of her betrayal. I said, "Okay," stood up and left the room. Before exiting completely, I told her she could be with Ricardo now, and at minimum she needed to leave the house. She clearly liked him and he clearly liked her, so she wouldn't be homeless or destitute. She could stay at one of his properties or hotels. He certainly had enough of them. She was crying as I said that, sobbing actually, but she didn't argue because there was no ground to stand on. There wasn't a single thing she could say in that moment that would make sense or change anything. She eventually packed all her belongings and left that same night, which I'm grateful for. She didn't create drama, and if she had, I would have packed everything for her myself and left it on the lawn. I didn't shed a single tear despite her constant crying. I carried her belongings to the door, multiple trips with suitcases and boxes, and once everything was outside, I closed and locked it. She loaded her car by herself while I watched from the window. I had her served with divorce papers while she was at her business the following week. I don't know if clients were present at the time, but I hope so. I hope it was humiliating. Up next was the divorce proceedings. Hopefully, since she had a wealthy man now, she wouldn't make it complicated or fight me on anything. I'm extremely happy to report that the entire divorce chapter of my life is closed. I'm glad I made it through intact because there were some genuinely dark nights throughout that journey where I wasn't sure I would. I've known Alice for a massive portion of my life, nearly half of it at this point. For that entire period, I assumed I'd be with her permanently, until death do us part like we'd promised. Clearly, that's not reality. That saddened me deeply, especially during some difficult evenings when the house felt too empty and too quiet, but I persevered. The divorce was straightforward once it got before a judge. We couldn't reach agreements during mediation. She tried to claim she deserved more because of her emotional distress. But once the judge took control, things proceeded exactly as I'd hoped. I work for a corporation, but she owns a business she established after we married. I could have claimed a substantial portion of that business, maybe 30 or 40% based on what my attorney said, but instead I retained the house without compensating her for its value, which meant I avoided the hassle of refinancing or selling. There was some division of our savings. I'd accumulated significant savings over the years, being careful with money, so she received a portion, but nothing substantial, maybe 20%. No spousal support either, which was a huge relief. The best part is that I'd already secured certain possessions of value beforehand, and those remained in my possession without ever being mentioned in proceedings. The moment we finalized everything, the moment the judge signed those papers, I blocked her across every social media platform. The love I'd felt for her had completely evaporated over the months of proceedings, leaving only resentment. I noticed she was attempting to contact me because my phone indicates when blocked numbers try calling. She tried maybe a dozen times in the first week. I don't understand why she was trying to reach me since absolutely nothing connected us anymore. We had no children, no shared assets, no reason to communicate ever again. She appeared at the house one evening, claiming she'd been worried about me. I told her I was fine, and without emotion, I informed her I never wanted to see her there again. She started crying and said she just wanted to hug me one final time. She'd realized how different her life was without me, how much she'd lost. I closed the door in her face after that without saying another word. I've never been a cold person, never been the type to shut people out completely, and she must have been shocked to see how changed I was. You can't commit infidelity and still expect the relationship to remain unchanged. That's my perspective. If she thought we'd be mature and maintain friendship afterward, then she has no understanding of how reality works. She has Ricardo now and can build whatever happy life she wants with him. I'm completely finished with her. You didn't misread anything. You caught the truth stumbling over itself. The "I did it for business" excuse? Complete nonsense. Countless people grow companies without sleeping with clients. That wasn't strategy. That was just selfishness and poor character. Her showing up afterward requesting hugs and closure wasn't genuine remorse. It was regret that life didn't unfold as she'd imagined. She didn't miss you. She missed the stability, the security, and the version of herself she got to be while you were holding everything together. You didn't lose a marriage. You escaped one that was already hollow behind your back. Thank you for watching the video to the end. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. A playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to is now displayed on the screen. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.